You feel your heart race and your mind scatter the moment workplace pressure intensifies, watching yourself make reactive decisions you later regret. The stress is making you just as frantic as everyone else around you, and you're losing the clear thinking that once made you effective, while others somehow maintained their composure and seemed to thrive under the same pressure. I am Sun Tzu, and I learned that victory belongs to those who can think clearly when death surrounds them and chaos erupts on every side. The principles I'll share will give you an unshakable foundation of calm that no workplace crisis can penetrate. Using the same mental disciplines that allowed me to outthink enemies, even when outnumbered and surrounded. What worked to maintain strategic clarity in ancient warfare will give you the power to stay centered and decisive when modern pressures try to overwhelm you. But first, like this video, subscribe for more battle-tested wisdom, and comment your location below. Let's see how far the need for true composure has spread across the world. There was a burning watchtower on the hill above us, sending smoke signals into the dawn sky. When I first understood that panic spreads faster than flames, but composure spreads even faster among those who choose it. I was young then, leading my first major campaign against a force twice our size, and I watched my own army begin to unravel before the battle had even begun. The enemy had set fire to our forward observation post during the night, and when my soldiers saw the flames at sunrise, whispers of defeat began racing through our ranks like wildfire. I could see it in their eyes. That moment when confidence transforms into doubt, when strategy dissolves into survival instinct. Men who had trained for years were suddenly questioning everything, their hands trembling as they gripped their weapons. I had felt that same terror rising in my own chest. My heart was pounding, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Every instinct screamed at me to either charge forward in rage or retreat in fear. But then I noticed something that changed everything. One of my veteran sergeants, a man named Wei, sitting calmly by his cooking fire, methodically preparing his morning meal as if nothing had happened. His composure was magnetic. Soldiers began gravitating toward him, their panic subsiding just by being near someone who refused to be shaken. In that moment, I realized that calm thinking under pressure wasn't some mystical gift, it was a learnable skill, a strategic choice that could be made even when every fiber of your being wanted to react. I made a decision that would define my entire approach to leadership. Instead of addressing the army's fear with rousing speeches or harsh commands, I walked slowly through the camp, checking equipment with deliberate care, asking calm questions about logistics, maintaining the steady rhythm of preparation. I chose to model the behavior I wanted to see. The transformation was remarkable. As I projected composure, it began spreading through the ranks. Soldiers started focusing on their tasks instead of their fears. The panic that had threatened to destroy us before we even engaged the enemy began to dissolve. That day, we won a victory that military historians still study, not because of superior tactics or overwhelming force, but because we maintained our ability to think clearly when our enemies expected us to panic. We turned their psychological warfare against them. They had counted on our fear to do half their work for them. I learned that composure is contagious in both directions. Fear spreads quickly, but so does confidence when someone has the courage to choose calm over chaos. The strategic advantage I gained by mastering my inner state first became the foundation of every victory that followed. This lesson applies directly to your modern workplace battles. When deadline pressure mounts and everyone around you starts making frantic decisions, your composure becomes your greatest strategic asset. Like that burning watchtower, workplace crises are often designed to trigger panic, but the person who maintains their clarity, while others lose theirs, gains an enormous advantage. The colleagues who seem to thrive under the same pressure that overwhelms you have learned this ancient secret. Your external circumstances don't determine your internal state. You do. I learned about the nature of fear from my cavalry horses, those magnificent war animals that could charge into battle with unwavering courage one day and bolt in terror at a rustling bush the next. Watching them taught me something profound about why the same survival instincts that kept our ancestors alive now sabotage us in modern conflicts. During one campaign, I witnessed an entire cavalry unit become spooked by a single horse that had caught the scent of a predator. Within moments, what started as one animal's legitimate fear response had infected the entire herd. Horses that had faced enemy spears without flinching were now trampling each other in blind panic over a threat that didn't even exist. I realized then that fear travels through groups like a contagion, bypassing rational thought and triggering ancient survival mechanisms that served us well when we faced saber-toothed tigers, but work against us when we face workplace challenges. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a charging enemy and an angry supervisor, triggers the same flood of stress hormones, the same tunnel vision, the same urgent need to fight or flee. On countless battlefields, I observed how this physiological reality played out. When soldiers felt threatened, their breathing became shallow and rapid. Their hearts raced, their vision narrowed to focus only on immediate dangers. Blood flow shifted away from the thinking parts of their brains toward the muscles needed for survival. In moments when they most needed strategic thinking, their bodies were preparing them for physical combat. The cruel irony is that these responses, which saved our ancestors from becoming prey, now make us prey to poor decision-making. When your boss criticizes your project, your ancient brain interprets this as a life-threatening attack. When deadline pressure mounts, your nervous system responds as if you're being hunted. When office politics heat up, your body prepares for war, even though the battlefield is a conference room. I trained myself to recognize the early warning signs of composure breakdown, both in myself and my troops. The first signal was always breathing. It became rapid and shallow when fear took hold. Next came the physical tension, particularly in the shoulders and jaw. Then the mental symptoms followed: racing thoughts, inability to focus, seeing only problems instead of solutions. Understanding this helped me develop countermeasures. I learned that the warrior who could recognize these ancient patterns and interrupt them gained a decisive advantage over those who remained slaves to their biology. When I felt my own fight-or-flight response activating, I knew I had perhaps 30 seconds to intervene before it overwhelmed my strategic thinking. The most successful generals I knew had all mastered this same principle. They understood that their greatest enemy wasn't the opposing army, it was their own nervous system's tendency to hijack rational thought when pressure mounted. They trained their minds like they trained their bodies, building the discipline to stay calm when everything inside them screamed for action. This is why your modern workplace battles feel so overwhelming. You're not weak or fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming with no training in how to override these ancient responses. But once you understand the enemy, including the enemy within you, can begin to develop the strategic countermeasures that will keep you thinking clearly when others lose their minds. The cracked bronze mirror in my tent showed me a face I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, drawn with defeat, marked by the weight of 10,000 lives lost because I had not known myself well enough when it mattered most. That reflection taught me that self-knowledge is the first victory, and without it, all other victories are built on sand. My greatest defeat came not from superior enemy tactics or overwhelming force, but from my own blind spots. I had led my army into a valley that seemed strategically sound, confident in my abilities and dismissive of my advisor's concerns. I thought I knew my own judgment, trusted my own instincts completely. I was wrong when the enemy sprang their trap and we found ourselves surrounded. I watched myself make every mistake I had sworn never to make. Under pressure, I became reactive instead of strategic. I let emotion drive decisions that should have been based on cold calculation. I confused activity with progress, urgency with importance. Most damaging of all, I refused to acknowledge these failures as they were happening, doubling down on poor choices rather than adapting. The brutal self-assessment that followed forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my patterns under pressure. I discovered that when threatened, I became either overly aggressive or paralyzed by analysis. I learned that my pride often prevented me from seeking counsel when I most needed it. I realized that my confidence, which served me well in calm moments, became dangerous arrogance when stress mounted. This painful process of honest self-examination became the foundation of everything I accomplished afterward. I developed the discipline to observe myself objectively during crisis moments, as if I were watching another general's decisions from a distance. I learned to recognize my own early warning signs, the subtle shift in my thinking that preceded poor judgment. I created specific practices to build this self-awareness in high-pressure moments. Before making any significant decision under stress, I would pause and ask myself 3 questions. What am I feeling right now? What might I be missing because of that feeling? What would I advise another general in this exact situation? This wasn't about eliminating emotion. Emotions carry important information about threats and opportunities. It was about creating enough space between feeling and action to make conscious choices rather than unconscious reactions. I learned that the general who knows his own patterns under pressure can prepare countermeasures, while the one who doesn't remains at the mercy of his own psychology. I also discovered that knowing your breaking point is the key to never reaching it. Through careful observation, I identified the specific circumstances that triggered my worst decision-making: when I felt personally attacked, when time pressure was extreme, when I was physically exhausted. Once I knew these vulnerabilities, I could either avoid those situations or prepare additional safeguards when they were unavoidable. The most difficult truth I had to accept was that self-knowledge is not a destination but a practice. Each new challenge revealed new aspects of myself, both strengths and weaknesses I hadn't recognized before. The mirror in my tent became a daily reminder that the general who stops learning about himself stops growing as a leader. Your modern workplace presents the same challenge. The colleague who knows how they react under deadline pressure, who understands their own triggers and patterns, possesses a strategic advantage over those who remain mysteries to themselves. When you know yourself deeply, you can position yourself for success and prepare countermeasures for your own weaknesses. The steady rhythm of war drums had always fascinated me, but it wasn't until the siege of Yingchuan that I understood their true power. They taught me how controlled breathing could synchronize not just my army's march, but their courage itself. What I discovered during those desperate weeks would become one of my most practical tools for maintaining clarity. When chaos threatened to overwhelm, we had been surrounded for 23 days. Supplies running low, enemy catapults raining, stones on our walls day and night. The constant barrage was designed not just to break our defenses, but to break our spirits. I could see the toll it was taking on my men. Their breathing had become rapid and shallow, their movements jerky and desperate. Fear was suffocating them more effectively than any siege. During one particularly intense bombardment, I noticed something remarkable. The drummers focused on maintaining their steady beat, despite the chaos around them, remained calm while soldiers twice their size cowered in terror. Their breathing naturally synchronized with their rhythm, deep and controlled, and this physical composure translated into mental clarity. I began experimenting with this principle myself. When I felt panic rising during the worst moments of the siege, I would deliberately slow and deepen my breathing, creating an internal rhythm that remained steady regardless of external chaos. The effect was immediate and profound. My mind cleared, my strategic thinking returned, and my ability to make sound decisions under pressure was restored. The breakthrough came when I realized that breath is the bridge between mind and body. In crisis moments, when fear triggers your ancient survival responses, your breathing becomes the first casualty. But unlike your heart rate or stress hormones, breathing is something you can consciously control, and by controlling it, you can influence everything else. I developed specific breathing techniques for different types of pressure situations. For sudden shocks like unexpected attacks or urgent crises, I used what I called the 4-count breath. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. This pattern interrupted the panic response and restored mental balance within moments. For sustained pressure like long campaigns or extended negotiations, practiced deeper, slower breathing that activated what I later understood to be the body's natural calming responses. This wasn't just about relaxation. It was about maintaining peak performance under stress. I began teaching these techniques to my generals, and the results were dramatic. Commanders who had previously lost their composure under pressure became steadier and more decisive. The practice spread through the ranks, and I watched our entire army become more resilient and focused. The beauty of breath control is its simplicity and immediate availability. You can't always control your circumstances, but you can always control your breathing. In the heat of battle, when weapons might be lost and strategies might fail, your breath remains your most reliable ally. This principle applies perfectly to your modern workplace battles. When the pressure mounts and you feel your composure slipping, your breathing becomes your fastest path back to clarity. The colleague who masters this simple discipline gains access to their best thinking precisely when they need it most, while others remain trapped in reactive panic. The cup of tea sat cooling on my campaign table, while 10,000 lives hung in the balance. And in that moment of deliberate stillness, I learned that the decision not to decide immediately can be the most powerful decision of all. That untouched tea taught me the profound strategic value of creating space between trigger and response. My scouts had just brought word that the enemy was advancing faster than expected, their forces bearing down on our position with overwhelming numbers. Every general around my table was shouting for immediate action: retreat, advance, fortify, attack. The urgency in the tent was suffocating, and every instinct the first possessed screamed for swift movement. But something deeper told me to pause. I had learned from previous battles that the first move is rarely the best move, especially when pressure mounts and emotions run high. When everyone demands instant action, the wise general asks whether action itself might be the trap. So I sat, hands wrapped around that cooling tea, and let the moment expand. In those precious minutes of strategic stillness, patterns became clear that had been invisible in the heat of urgency. I noticed that the enemy's rapid advance left their flanks exposed. I realized their speed indicated desperation, not strength. I saw that our defensive position, which had seemed vulnerable under pressure, was actually ideal for the type of engagement they were forcing. The strategic pause revealed something crucial. My first instinct had been to react to their timeline, playing by their rules instead of my own. By refusing to be rushed, I maintained control over the battle's tempo and ultimately its outcome. We let them come to us, channeled their advance into a killing ground of our choosing, and turned their aggressive urgency into their downfall. This taught me that the warrior who moves first often loses to the one who thinks first. In the space between stimulus and response lies your power to choose, but only if you create that space deliberately. Most people collapse this gap, moving directly from trigger to reaction without conscious thought. This makes them predictable and vulnerable. I developed the discipline to pause when every instinct screamed for action. This wasn't hesitation or indecision, it was strategic patience. The pause allowed me to shift from reactive thinking to responsive thinking, from emotional decision-making to calculated choice. The practice became a cornerstone of my tactical approach. Before any major decision under pressure, I would create a moment of stillness, sometimes just a few seconds, sometimes longer if circumstances allowed. In that space, I would ask essential questions. What is this situation actually demanding of me? What am I assuming that might not be true? What would I do if I had all the time in the world? I learned to distinguish between real urgency and manufactured urgency. True emergencies requiring immediate action are actually quite rare. Most urgent situations are someone else's poor planning becoming your crisis, or emotional pressure masquerading as strategic necessity. Your modern workplace operates on the same principles. When everyone around you is demanding instant responses, immediate decisions, and rapid-fire solutions, your ability to create strategic pauses becomes your competitive advantage. The colleague who can create space between pressure and response maintains access to their best judgment, while others make reactive mistakes. The shifting sands of the desert battlefield taught me to read the subtle signs that others missed, turning environmental awareness into strategic advantage. When my army faced annihilation in what seemed like featureless wasteland, while my officers saw only empty terrain and impossible odds, I learned to perceive the hidden patterns that would determine our survival. We had been maneuvered into what appeared to be the worst possible position, caught in open desert with enemy forces approaching from multiple directions. My generals were focused entirely on the obvious threats: superior enemy numbers, our exposed position, the lack of natural defenses. Their panic was understandable but strategically useless. I had trained myself to see patterns when others saw only confusion, and in that desperate moment, my composure allowed me to notice what fear-blinded eyes missed. The wind patterns told me a sandstorm was approaching from the west. The behavior of the few desert birds overhead indicated water sources the enemy didn't know about. Most importantly, the very confidence of the enemy advance revealed they were following predictable patterns, assuming we would react with standard retreat maneuvers. This awareness came from years of practicing what I called wide-angle vision during crisis moments. When pressure mounts, most people's attention narrows dramatically. They see only the immediate threat, the obvious problem, the most urgent concern. This tunnel vision, while useful for focusing on immediate dangers, blinds them to the broader tactical situation. I learned to deliberately expand my awareness when others were contracting theirs. While they focused on what was going wrong, I trained myself to simultaneously observe what was going right, what was changing, what was possible. This wasn't optimistic thinking. It was strategic intelligence gathering that could only happen when composure enhanced rather than limited perception. The key was understanding that composure doesn't just calm your emotions, it sharpens your ability to process information accurately. When panic floods your system, you literally cannot see as clearly, think as broadly, or notice as much. Your brain shifts into survival mode, filtering out everything except immediate threats. But the general who maintains inner calm gains access to strategic intelligence that panicked competitors miss entirely. In that desert engagement, my environmental awareness revealed the perfect solution. We positioned ourselves to use the approaching sandstorm as cover, established supply lines to the hidden water sources, and turned the enemy's overconfidence into a trap. What had seemed like certain defeat became decisive victory because composure allowed me to read the full situation instead of just the threatening parts. I developed specific practices for maintaining this expanded awareness during high situations. I would regularly scan for changes in my environment, not just obvious threats, but subtle shifts in energy, unexpected opportunities, resources others overlooked. I learned to pay attention to what wasn't being said as much as what was, to notice who was absent from important discussions, to observe the micro-expressions that revealed true intentions behind diplomatic words. Your modern workplace operates with the same dynamics. When everyone else is laser-focused on the crisis of the moment, your ability to maintain broader situational awareness becomes an enormous strategic advantage. You notice the political undercurrents others miss, spot the opportunities hidden within problems, and see solutions that panic-blinded colleagues cannot perceive. A single torch guided my entire army through the darkest night of our campaign. And in that flickering flame, I discovered how one calm presence can illuminate the path for many when chaos threatens to consume everything. That steady light taught me that your emotional state doesn't just affect you, it becomes the emotional state of everyone around you. We were retreating through unfamiliar mountain passes after a devastating defeat. Our forces scattered and demoralized. Rain had extinguished most of our torches, and panic was spreading faster than we were moving. Men were abandoning equipment, breaking formation, some even deserting entirely. I could feel the army dissolving around me, held together by nothing more than habit and the fading hope that someone knew where we were going. That's when I noticed the torch. One soldier had managed to keep his flame alive despite the storm. Around him, a small group was maintaining perfect formation, their discipline intact even in retreat. They weren't the strongest or most experienced troops, but something about that steady light in the darkness was drawing others to them like moths to flame. I realized then that calm leadership creates calm followers through a process more powerful than any command or threat. When people are frightened and uncertain, they instinctively look for signs of stability, competence, and control. Your composure becomes their anchor in the storm, your steadiness their reference point for what's possible. I made a decision that changed the entire retreat. Instead of shouting orders over the chaos or trying to rally the troops with inspiring speeches, I simply began moving through the column with deliberate calm. I checked on wounded soldiers with unhurried care, made tactical adjustments with quiet confidence, and maintained the steady rhythm of leadership even when everything around us was falling apart. The transformation was remarkable. Soldiers who had been on the verge of panic began falling into step behind me. Units that had lost cohesion started reforming around the pocket of stability I was creating. Within hours, what had been a disorganized rout became an orderly withdrawal. We didn't just survive that night, we emerged stronger and more unified than before. This taught me that your emotional state is never private when you're in a position of influence. Whether you're leading armies or leading meetings, people are constantly reading your energy and adjusting their own responses accordingly. When you project composure, you give others permission to be calm. When you demonstrate confidence, you make confidence possible for your team. I learned specific techniques for projecting composure to my troops. Even when I was feeling uncertainty myself, I discovered that leadership often means performing stability until you feel it, modeling the behavior you want to see rather than expressing the emotions you're experiencing. This wasn't about being dishonest, it was about understanding that leadership requires you to manage your emotional expression as strategically as you manage any other resource. The ripple effect of maintaining your center when others lose, theirs extends far beyond your immediate team. Your composure becomes contagious, spreading through networks and creating pockets of stability that can transform entire organizations. One person who refuses to panic can change the entire dynamic of a crisis situation. Your modern workplace desperately needs this kind of leadership. When deadline pressure mounts and everyone starts making frantic decisions, your ability to remain calm doesn't just benefit you, it becomes a gift to everyone around you. The scout collapsed at my tent entrance, exhausted from running in circles for 3 hours, chasing reports that turned out to be shadows and rumors. Watching him gasp for breath while delivering no useful intelligence taught me that misdirected Energy is worse than no energy at all. Land. That panic is the most expensive luxury a leader can afford. I had sent him to investigate enemy movements, but fear had transformed a simple reconnaissance mission into a frantic marathon of wasted motion. Instead of moving systematically and observing carefully, he had sprinted from position to position, burning through his physical and mental reserves while gathering information that proved worthless. His panic had made him both ineffective and exhausted. This incident crystallized my understanding of something I had been observing throughout my campaigns. Panic is extraordinarily expensive from a strategic resource perspective. When people lose their composure, they don't just make poor decisions, they waste precious energy, time, and attention that could be directed toward actual solutions. I began analyzing the hidden costs of reactive behavior in critical moments. Panicked soldiers required more supplies because they burned calories at unsustainable rates. They needed more medical attention because stress-induced mistakes led to injuries. They consumed more leadership bandwidth because they couldn't function independently. Most critically, they spread their inefficiency to others, creating cascading resource drains throughout the entire organization. In contrast, I observed that calm decision-making was both faster and more accurate than its frantic alternative. When I maintained my composure during crisis situations, I could process information more efficiently, identify solutions more quickly, and implement decisions with fewer mistakes. The energy I saved by staying calm could be redirected toward strategic thinking and tactical execution. This realization led me to develop what I called energy auditing during high-pressure situations. I would regularly assess how my mental and emotional resources were being spent, asking myself whether my current approach was generating useful results or simply burning energy without purpose. If I found myself spinning in unproductive worry or reactive planning, I would redirect that energy toward more strategic activities. I learned to distinguish between high-value energy expenditures and wasteful ones. Careful preparation, systematic analysis, and deliberate action required significant energy but produced proportional results. Worry, rumination, and reactive scrambling consumed just as much energy while producing nothing useful. The most successful commanders I knew had all mastered this principle of energy conservation. They understood that leadership energy is finite and must be allocated strategically. They saved their intensity for moments when it would have maximum impact, rather than operating at crisis levels constantly. I also discovered that calm leadership actually multiplies energy rather than consuming it. When I approached challenges with composed confidence, my officers required less direction and support. They could operate more independently, make better decisions on their own, and contribute positive energy to our collective efforts rather than draining it. Your modern workplace operates under the same economic principles. The colleague who burns through their mental and emotional resources in reactive panic will inevitably run out of steam when sustained performance is required. But the professional who conserves their energy through composed decision-making maintains peak performance throughout extended challenges. Understanding that composure is both an energy conservation strategy and a performance enhancement tool transforms how you approach workplace pressure. Every moment you spend in panic mode is an investment that generates negative returns. The strategic map spread across my campaign table was covered in contingency plans, each one born from a specific fear about what could go wrong. And in that web of preparation, I discovered how to transform anxiety into strategic advantage rather than letting worry consume my peace of mind. My officers often marveled at what they called my pessimistic preparation, my tendency to plan for every conceivable disaster, while maintaining calm confidence in our ultimate success. They didn't understand that the two were intimately connected. I could remain composed under pressure precisely because I had already mentally prepared for every worst-case scenario. My imagination could conjure. The difference between productive concern and destructive anxiety became clear to me during a campaign where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Supply lines were cut, reinforcements were delayed, weather turned against us, and enemy tactics proved more sophisticated than anticipated. But instead of panic, I felt an odd sense of relief, because I had already planned for each of these contingencies. I learned that worry, properly channeled, is actually a form of strategic intelligence. Your anxiety about potential problems is your mind's way of conducting reconnaissance on future challenges. The key is learning to use fear as information rather than letting it use you as its victim. I developed a systematic approach to what I called productive worry. When concerns arose about upcoming challenges, instead of trying to suppress them or being consumed by them, I would deliberately engage with each fear to extract its strategic value. I would ask, what specific problem is this worry trying to warn me about? What preparation could I make now that would address this concern? What contingency plan would give me confidence in this area? This process transformed anxious energy into concrete action. Instead of lying awake worrying about supply shortages, I would develop multiple supply contingencies. Rather than fretting about enemy tactics, I would prepare countermeasures for various scenarios. The worry didn't disappear, but it became fuel for preparation rather than source of paralysis. I discovered that the best generals are controlled pessimists who prepare for everything while expecting success. They assume that if something can go wrong, it probably will, so they plan accordingly. But they don't let this realistic assessment of potential problems undermine their confidence in their ability to handle whatever challenges arise. The strategic planning process that emerged from this approach gave me enormous confidence during actual crises. When problems occurred, and they always did, I rarely felt caught off guard because I had already thought through similar scenarios and prepared responses. This preparation allowed me to maintain composure when others panicked. Because their crisis was my contingency plan, I also learned to distinguish between productive worry and useless rumination. Productive worry leads to specific preparations and concrete actions. Destructive worry simply cycles through the same fears repeatedly without generating solutions. When I caught myself in unproductive anxiety loops, I would either convert the concern into actionable preparation or consciously set it aside. Your modern workplace operates under the same principles. The professional who channels anxiety into systematic preparation gains enormous advantages over those who either ignore potential problems or become paralyzed by them. Worry becomes wisdom when it's transformed into strategic planning rather than remaining trapped as emotional turbulence. The strategic map spread across my campaign table was covered in contingency plans, each one born from a specific fear about what could go wrong. And in that web of preparation, I discovered how to transform anxiety into strategic advantage rather than letting worry consume my peace of mind. My officers often marveled at what they called my pessimistic preparation, my tendency to plan for every conceivable disaster, while maintaining calm confidence in our ultimate success. They didn't understand that the two were intimately connected. I could remain composed under pressure precisely because I had already mentally prepared for every worst-case scenario. My imagination could conjure. The difference between productive concern and destructive anxiety became clear to me during a campaign where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Supply lines were cut, reinforcements were delayed, weather turned against us, and enemy tactics proved more sophisticated than anticipated. But instead of panic, I felt an odd sense of relief, because I had already planned for each of these contingencies. I learned that worry, properly channeled, is actually a form of strategic intelligence. Your anxiety about potential problems is your mind's way of conducting reconnaissance on future challenges. The key is learning to use fear as information rather than letting it use you as its victim. I developed a systematic approach to what I called productive worry. When concerns arose about upcoming challenges, instead of trying to suppress them or being consumed by them, I would deliberately engage with each fear to extract its strategic value. I would ask, what specific problem is this worry trying to warn me about? What preparation could I make now that would address this concern? What contingency plan would give me confidence in this area? This process transformed anxious energy into concrete action. Instead of lying awake worrying about supply shortages, I would develop multiple supply contingencies. Rather than fretting about enemy tactics, I would prepare countermeasures for various scenarios. The worry didn't disappear, but it became fuel for preparation rather than source of paralysis. I discovered that the best generals are controlled pessimists who prepare for everything while expecting success. They assume that if something can go wrong, it probably will, so they plan accordingly. But they don't let this realistic assessment of potential problems undermine their confidence in their ability to handle whatever challenges arise. The strategic planning process that emerged from this approach gave me enormous confidence during actual crises. When problems occurred, and they always did, I rarely felt caught off guard because I had already thought through similar scenarios and prepared responses. This preparation allowed me to maintain composure when others panicked, because their crisis was my contingency plan. I also learned to distinguish between productive worry and useless rumination. Productive worry leads to specific preparations and concrete actions. Destructive worry simply cycles through the same fears repeatedly without generating solutions. When I caught myself in unproductive anxiety loops, I would either convert the concern into actionable preparation or consciously set it aside. Your modern workplace operates under the same principles. The professional who channels anxiety into systematic preparation gains enormous advantages over those who either ignore potential problems or become paralyzed by them. Worry becomes wisdom when it's transformed into strategic planning rather than remaining trapped as emotional turbulence. The tactical retreat that saved my army and taught me that sometimes the bravest action is stepping back was the hardest lesson I ever learned about leadership. That withdrawal is often the most powerful form of engagement, and that knowing when not to fight can be more valuable than knowing how to fight. We had been drawn into what appeared to be a winnable battle against an enemy force we outnumbered 2-1. My generals were eager for engagement, my troops were confident, and every tactical manual would have recommended immediate attack. But something in the enemy's positioning troubled me. They seemed too willing to accept our terms of engagement, too eager to meet us in open battle. As I studied their formation more carefully, I realized we were walking into an elaborate trap. Their apparent weakness was carefully calculated bait, designed to draw us into a position where hidden forces could surround us. The battle we were eager to fight was exactly the battle they wanted us to fight, on terms that would favor them despite our numerical advantage. Making the decision to withdraw required every ounce of courage I possessed. My officers questioned my judgment, my soldiers doubted my resolve, and my own pride screamed against the apparent cowardice of retreat. But I had learned that strategic wisdom sometimes demands actions that feel wrong to every instinct you possess. The withdrawal proved to be the turning point of the entire campaign. By refusing to engage on their terms, we forced the enemy to abandon their prepared advantages and pursue us into terrain that favored our tactics. What would have been a devastating defeat became a decisive victory, but only because I had the discipline to recognize a battle not worth fighting. This experience taught me the strategic wisdom of choosing your battles carefully. Not every challenge requires direct confrontation. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every opportunity to prove yourself is actually an opportunity. Some are traps disguised as chances for glory. I developed criteria for distinguishing between battles worth fighting and conflicts worth avoiding. I learned to ask, are we fighting on terms we chose or terms our opponent chose? Do we have genuine strategic advantage or merely apparent strength? Is this engagement moving us toward our larger objectives or distracting us from them? The hardest part of this discipline was overcoming the emotional pressure to prove strength through constant engagement. There's a primitive satisfaction in meeting every challenge head-on, in never backing down from confrontation. But I discovered that this reactive approach to conflict often served my enemies' purposes better than my own. I learned to recognize when fighting would make things worse rather than better. Sometimes the enemy wants you to engage their counting on your predictable aggressiveness to trap you in disadvantageous circumstances. Sometimes the wisest response to provocation is strategic patience, allowing your opponent to overextend themselves while you preserve your resources for battles you can actually win. The principle applies equally to choosing when to engage and how intensely. Some conflicts require full commitment, others need only minimal response, and still others are best ignored entirely. The general who treats every skirmish like a decisive battle exhausts himself and his forces, while the one who reserves full engagement for strategic opportunities maintains peak effectiveness when it matters most. Your modern workplace presents these same tactical decisions daily. Knowing when to step back from unwinnable conflicts, when to avoid battles that serve others' agendas rather than your own, becomes a crucial professional skill. The tactical retreat that saved my army and taught me that sometimes the bravest action is stepping back was the hardest lesson I ever learned about leadership. That withdrawal is often the most powerful form of engagement, and that knowing when not to fight can be more valuable than knowing how to fight. We had been drawn into what appeared to be a winnable battle against an enemy force we outnumbered 2-1. My generals were eager for engagement, my troops were confident, and every tactical manual would have recommended immediate attack. But something in the enemy's positioning troubled me. They seemed too willing to accept our terms of engagement, too eager to meet us in open battle. As I studied their formation more carefully, I realized we were walking into an elaborate trap. Their apparent weakness was carefully calculated bait, designed to draw us into a position where hidden forces could surround us. The battle we were eager to fight was exactly the battle they wanted us to fight, on terms that would favor them despite our numerical advantage. Making the decision to withdraw required every ounce of courage I possessed. My officers questioned my judgment, my soldiers doubted my resolve, and my own pride screamed against the apparent cowardice of retreat. But I had learned that strategic wisdom sometimes demands actions that feel wrong to every instinct you possess. The withdrawal proved to be the turning point of the entire campaign. By refusing to engage on their terms, we forced the enemy to abandon their prepared advantages and pursue us into terrain that favored our tactics. What would have been a devastating defeat became a decisive victory, but only because I had the discipline to recognize a battle not worth fighting. This experience taught me the strategic wisdom of choosing your battles carefully. Not every challenge requires direct confrontation. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every opportunity to prove yourself is actually an opportunity. Some are traps disguised as chances for glory. I developed criteria for distinguishing between battles worth fighting and conflicts worth avoiding. I learned to ask, are we fighting on terms we chose or terms our opponent chose? Do we have genuine strategic advantage or merely apparent strength? Is this engagement moving us toward our larger objectives or distracting us from them? The hardest part of this discipline was overcoming the emotional pressure to prove strength through constant engagement. There's a primitive satisfaction in meeting every challenge head-on, in never backing down from confrontation. But I discovered that this reactive approach to conflict often served my enemies' purposes better than my own. I learned to recognize when fighting would make things worse rather than better. Sometimes the enemy wants you to engage their counting on your predictable aggressiveness to trap you in disadvantageous circumstances. Sometimes the wisest response to provocation is strategic patience, allowing your opponent to overextend themselves while you preserve your resources for battles you can actually win. The principle applies equally to choosing when to engage and how intensely. Some conflicts require full commitment, others need only minimal response, and still others are best ignored entirely. The general who treats every skirmish like a decisive battle exhausts himself and his forces, while the one who reserves full engagement for strategic opportunities maintains peak effectiveness when it matters most. Your modern workplace presents these same tactical decisions daily. Knowing when to step back from unwinnable conflicts, when to avoid battles that serve others' agendas rather than your own, becomes a crucial professional skill. The arsenal of weapons I maintained in perfect condition taught me that preparation eliminates panic, and that the general who has multiple ready responses to predictable challenges gains decisive advantages over those who improvise under pressure. I discovered this principle during a siege where the enemy employed every psychological tactic imaginable to break our resolve. They sent false surrender offers, spread demoralizing rumors, staged fake retreats, and used countless other methods designed to trigger emotional reactions. Initially, each new tactic caught me off guard, forcing me to devise responses while managing the immediate crisis. But I began to notice patterns in their approach. Certain types of pressure appeared repeatedly, with predictable timing and methods. I realized that instead of reacting to each incident as if it were unique, I could prepare standard responses to predictable crisis situations. I developed what I called my ready arsenal, a collection of prepared responses for common challenges. When the enemy spread rumors, I had a communication protocol ready. When they staged false retreats, I had verification procedures in place. When they attempted psychological manipulation, I had counter-narratives prepared. This preparation transformed chaotic crisis management into smooth tactical execution. The strategic advantage of having multiple prepared options became clear during our most desperate hour. The enemy launched their final assault using a combination of tactics they had never used before, but each individual element was something I had prepared for. While they expected us to scramble and improvise, we responded with calm efficiency, implementing pre-planned countermeasures that neutralized their advantages. This taught me that improvisation works best when built on solid preparation. The general who tries to create everything from scratch during crisis moments operates under enormous disadvantage compared to the one who can select from proven responses. Preparation doesn't eliminate creativity, provides the foundation that makes effective creativity possible. I learned to distinguish between rigid planning and flexible preparation. Rigid plans assume specific scenarios will unfold exactly as anticipated, and they break down when circumstances change. Flexible preparation develops multiple options for handling categories of challenges, providing adaptable responses that can be modified based on actual conditions. The process of creating prepared responses forced me to think through challenges more systematically than reactive improvisation allowed. When I prepared for potential supply disruptions, I had to understand our vulnerabilities, identify alternative sources, and develop distribution contingencies. This deeper analysis made me more effective even when the specific crisis I had prepared for never materialized. I also discovered that the confidence gained from thorough preparation had strategic value beyond the specific responses themselves. When I knew I had contingencies for major risks, I could maintain composure during minor setbacks. The psychological security of being prepared allowed me to focus on execution rather than worrying about what might go wrong. Your modern workplace operates under identical principles. The professional who has prepared responses for common challenges, conversations, technical failures, deadline pressures, interpersonal conflicts, maintains composure and effectiveness, while others scramble to improvise. This preparation doesn't make you rigid. It makes you confidently adaptable. The difference between being prepared and being caught off guard often determines whether you're seen as competent or overwhelmed, strategic or reactive, leadership material or someone who needs constant supervision. Preparation is the bridge between anxiety and confidence, between reaction and response. The lighthouse keeper who guided ships safely through the treacherous straits during the worst storm of our campaign showed me how steady leadership creates safe passage for others, and that becoming the calm center others can orient around is perhaps the highest form of strategic service. I watched from the harbor as ship after ship navigated the dangerous waters, each captain using the lighthouse beam as their reference point for safe passage. The lighthouse keeper never left his post, never wavered in his duty, and never allowed the storm's fury to diminish the steadiness of his light. In that simple dedication, I saw the essence of leadership during crisis. When my own army faced its darkest hours round, outnumbered, and running low on supplies, I realized that my primary responsibility wasn't to solve every problem or eliminate every threat. It was to become the kind of steady presence that would allow others to find their own courage and competence, even when circumstances seemed hopeless. I learned that your steadiness becomes their strength in crisis moments, but this requires a fundamental shift in how you understand leadership responsibility. Instead of trying to carry everyone else's burdens, you focus on maintaining your own center so completely that others can draw strength from your stability. The specific techniques I developed for helping others find their composure began with modeling the behavior I wanted to see. When panic threatened to overwhelm my officers, I would speak more slowly rather than more urgently. When confusion dominated our councils, I would ask clearer questions rather than providing hasty answers. When fear paralyzed decision-making, I would demonstrate calm confidence in our ability to find solutions. I discovered that you cannot give others what you don't possess yourself. If you're panicking internally while trying to project calm externally, people sense the incongruence and it actually increases their anxiety. But when your composure is genuine, when you've done the inner work to build unshakable foundations, your presence becomes genuinely reassuring to others. The most effective approach was what I called infectious calm, deliberately spreading composure through every interaction. When officers came to me with urgent problems, I would receive their concerns with steady attention rather than matching their energy level. When soldiers approached with fears and doubts, I would acknowledge their feelings, while demonstrating unwavering confidence in our collective ability to handle whatever challenges arose. But I also learned the crucial distinction between providing steady leadership and taking responsibility for others' emotional states. You can guide others toward finding their composure, but you cannot create it for them. Attempting to control or fix everyone else's anxiety becomes a form of panic disguised as helpfulness. The multiplication effect of calm leadership in group dynamics became one of my most powerful strategic tools. When I maintained my center during crisis, it gave others permission to find their own centers. When I demonstrated that composed thinking was possible even under extreme pressure, it reminded others that they possessed the same capability. Watched as this approach transformed not just individual performance, but entire group dynamics. Teams that had been fragmenting under pressure began working together more effectively. Officers who had been paralyzed by overwhelm started making confident decisions. Soldiers who had been consumed by fear rediscovered their courage and competence. Your modern workplace desperately needs this kind of leadership. When everyone around you is losing their composure, your ability to remain centered doesn't just benefit you, it becomes a gift that allows others to access their own best thinking and performance. The bamboo grove outside my study taught me the most profound lesson about strategic patience, how deep roots and patient growth create unbreakable strength, and why the general who can see beyond immediate pressures gains advantages that rushed competitors can never match. I had planted those bamboo shoots during my first year of military service, when I was young and eager for rapid advancement. For months, I watched impatiently as they seemed to make no progress whatsoever. While other plants in my garden grew visibly week by week, the bamboo appeared dormant, almost lifeless. I began to doubt whether they would ever amount to anything significant. Years later, I understood what had been happening beneath the surface. Those bamboo plants had been developing the most extensive root system in my entire garden, spreading deep and wide, creating an unshakable foundation that would support extraordinary growth when the time was right. When they finally broke through, they grew faster and stronger than anything else around them. This taught me that the most powerful strategic advantages often develop invisibly, through patient cultivation of fundamentals that competitors ignore because they produce no immediate results. The general obsessed with quick victories remains perpetually vulnerable to the one who builds lasting strength through strategic patience. I began applying this principle to my own development and that of my forces. Instead of seeking dramatic, short-term gains that would impress observers, I focused on building the deep capabilities that would create sustainable advantages over time. I invested in training that wouldn't pay off for months, relationships that might not prove valuable for years, and strategic positions that required patience to develop fully. The strategic advantage of maintaining long-term perspective became most apparent during extended campaigns where immediate pressures constantly tempted me to abandon deeper objectives. When supply lines were threatened, the urgent need was always to secure immediate resources, but the strategic need was often to establish more reliable long-term systems. When enemy tactics created short-term setbacks, the emotional impulse was to respond immediately, but the strategic response was often to let events develop while maintaining focus on ultimate objectives. I learned that rushed decisions often create more problems than they solve, generating cascading consequences that require even more urgent responses. The general, trapped in this cycle of reactive urgency, never gains the space needed for strategic thinking. But the one who cultivates patience as a strategic asset can play longer games that yield greater rewards. This required developing what I called temporal perspective, the ability to simultaneously hold awareness of immediate circumstances and long-term trajectories. When facing crisis moments, I would ask myself, how will this decision look in 6 months? What am I optimizing for immediate relief or lasting advantage? Am I solving the problem or just treating the symptoms? The power of playing the long game when others are trapped in the moment became one of my greatest competitive advantages. While enemies focused on winning individual battles, I could focus on winning entire campaigns. While they reacted to my immediate moves, I was positioning for strategies that wouldn't become apparent until much later. I discovered that strategic patience is not passive waiting, it's active cultivation of advantages that mature over time. The patient general doesn't avoid action. He chooses actions based on their long-term value rather than their immediate impact. He builds capabilities, nurtures relationships, and establishes positions that create compounding returns on investment. Your modern workplace rewards the same long-term thinking. The professional who can resist the pressure for immediate results while building lasting competencies and relationships ultimately outperforms those who optimize for short-term visibility at the expense of sustainable development. The scroll that evolved with each battle, growing from a simple collection of tactics into a comprehensive guide for maintaining composure under any circumstance, taught me that wisdom must be both preserved and adapted, that creating your own systematic approach to staying calm is the bridge between knowing principles and living them. I began this document after my first major victory, thinking I would simply record the strategies that had worked. But as campaigns continued and challenges evolved, I realized that static rules were insufficient for dynamic warfare. The manual needed to grow with my understanding, adapting ancient principles to new circumstances while preserving the timeless truths that never changed. The process of creating this personal system forced me to distill years of experience into practical guidance I could access during crisis moments. When pressure mounted and clear thinking became difficult, I couldn't rely on vague memories of past successes. I needed specific practices I could implement immediately to restore my composure and strategic clarity. I organized my manual around the core elements that determine success or failure under pressure. The first section focused on self-knowledge, my personal patterns under stress, early warning signs of composure, breakdown, and the specific triggers that required extra vigilance. I documented not just what worked, but what consistently failed, creating a guide that helped me avoid repeating costly mistakes. The second section contained my arsenal of composure, restoration techniques, breathing patterns for different types of pressure, questioning frameworks for strategic decision-making, and step-by-step processes for regaining clarity when overwhelmed. These weren't theoretical concepts, but battle-tested methods I could execute even when my thinking was compromised by stress. The third section dealt with environmental management, how to create conditions that supported calm thinking, how to minimize unnecessary stressors, and how to position myself advantageously before crises struck. I learned that preventing composure breakdown was far more effective than trying to recover from it. And this section captured the proactive measures that kept me functioning at peak effectiveness. The most important insight was that consistency in small things creates strength in large moments. The daily practices that seemed insignificant during peaceful periods, morning reflection, evening review, regular breathing exercises, systematic preparation, became crucial during crises. The manual helped me maintain these disciplines, even when their value wasn't immediately apparent. I discovered that the act of writing down my practices forced me to refine and clarify them. Vague intentions became specific commitments. General principles became concrete actions. The process of documentation transformed intuitive responses into teachable systems that I could share with others and improve over time. The manual also included adaptation protocols, guidelines for modifying my approaches when circumstances changed or when old methods proved insufficient. This prevented the system from becoming rigid doctrine, keeping it alive and responsive to new challenges. Your modern workplace demands this same systematic approach. The professional who develops their own personal manual for staying calm under pressure, documenting what works, what doesn't, and what circumstances require special attention, gains enormous advantages over those who rely on improvisation during crisis moments. The daily rituals that build unshakable composure become your most valuable professional assets, but only if you practice them consistently enough to access them automatically when pressure mounts. Your personal system becomes the bridge between ancient wisdom and modern application. The master's seal passed from my hands to my successors represented far more than authority or recognition. It symbolized the responsibility to carry wisdom forward, to ensure that the principles of staying calm while others panic would survive and serve future generations facing their own storms. As I reflect on decades of applying these principles across countless battles and challenges, I'm struck by how the art of maintaining composure has rippled outward in ways I never anticipated. The officer who learned to breathe through crisis became a general who saved thousands of lives. The advisor who mastered strategic patience prevented wars through diplomatic wisdom. The soldier who built inner strength became a teacher who multiplied these capabilities across entire armies. Your composure becomes your greatest contribution to others, extending far beyond your immediate sphere of influence. When you refuse to panic, you give others permission to find their own calm. When you demonstrate that clear thinking is possible under pressure, you remind everyone around you that they possess the same capability. This is not a small gift in a world increasingly driven by reactive urgency. Your centered presence becomes a beacon for those lost in chaos. The ripple effects of one person who refuses to panic can transform entire organizations, communities, and even cultures. History is shaped not just by those who act boldly, but by those who think clearly when boldness could lead to disaster. The general who pauses before the charge, the advisor who counsels patience when others demand speed, the leader who maintains perspective when crisis narrows everyone else's vision. These are the figures who change the course of events through the power of composed wisdom. But mastering these principles is not a destination. It's a continuing journey of deepening practice. Each new challenge reveals new aspects of maintaining composure, new applications of ancient wisdom, new opportunities to refine your understanding. The art of staying calm while others panic evolves as you evolve, growing more sophisticated. As your capacity for handling complexity increases, your responsibility extends beyond personal benefit to modeling these capabilities for those who follow. Every time you choose composure over panic, strategic thinking over reactive scrambling, patient preparation over frantic improvisation, you demonstrate what's possible for human beings under pressure. You become proof that these principles work, evidence that ancient wisdom applies to modern challenges. The work is never finished because the opportunities to practice never end. Your workplace will continue presenting situations designed to trigger panic. Pressures will mount, deadlines will loom, conflicts will arise, and unexpected challenges will test your composure. But now you possess the tools, understanding, and systematic approach needed to meet these challenges from a foundation of strength rather than a position of reactive vulnerability. Remember that the goal is not to eliminate all stress or avoid all pressure. It's to maintain your capacity for clear thinking and strategic response, regardless of external circumstances. The general who stays calm in the storm doesn't do so because the storm isn't real, but because he has built the inner strength and practical skills needed to navigate any weather. Carry these principles forward. Practice them daily. Share them generously. Let your composed presence in an increasingly frantic world become your lasting contribution to those whose lives you touch. The art of staying calm while others panic is both ancient wisdom and urgent necessity, and now it lives.